He told her she was a gold digger. He told her the baby wasn't his. But 5 years later, the truth would hit him in a way he never saw coming. Hi, my beautiful family. If you believe in the power of a mother's love, comment mom below and subscribe. This is for every woman who fought for her family when the world told her to quit. The sound of the restaurant door slammed behind him as Max Matthews strode out without a second glance. His words, cold and accusatory, echoed in Lily Carter's ears. "Gold digger," he had called her, his voice thick with disdain. "I'm not the father of this child. Get out of my life." Lily stood there, her hand shaking slightly as it rested on her stomach. She watched the door close behind him, her heart racing with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could someone she had trusted, someone she had loved, throw everything away without even considering the truth? How could he deny his own flesh and blood? But deep down, she already knew. This was the moment she would have to carry this burden alone. This child would never be a mistake. No matter how hard it would be, she was determined to raise him without Max, without anyone's help but her own. As Lily left the restaurant, the weight of the accusation pressed heavily on her chest, but her determination only grew stronger. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her son, for the future she would build despite the rejection she'd just faced. And from that moment on, Lily's journey was clear. She was going to raise her child with or without Max. No amount of doubt, no matter how harsh the accusation, would stop her from proving she was more than capable of doing it on her own. It wasn't going to be easy. Raising a child on her own in a city like New York, where dreams could feel more like illusions, would take everything she had. But what Lily didn't know at that moment was that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge her in ways she never anticipated. A journey that would eventually lead her to face Max again, but not in the way she expected. Lily had spent the last few months living between the cracks of her own dreams and the chaos of single motherhood. It hadn't been easy, not by a long shot. There were days when the weight of the world felt like it was pressing down on her chest, suffocating her with all the things she had to do and the pieces of herself she had yet to find again. But there was one thing Lily knew for certain. She wasn't going to let Max's rejection define her. And she wasn't going to let it define Noah. Noah. Her beautiful, vibrant son, whose every giggle and every chubby little handprint on the window made her feel like she was doing something right, even when everything around her seemed to be falling apart. He was her reason for waking up every morning, her reason to keep going even when she felt like giving up. It hadn't been easy, but nothing worth having ever was. She had learned that much in the months since Max had walked out of her life. It was early morning when Lily sat down in the tiny but cozy living room of their apartment, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Noah was sitting on the floor, his little legs splayed out in front of him, building a tower with brightly colored blocks. He had his father's smile, that wide, easy grin that melted Lily's heart every time she saw it. But the resemblance to Max didn't stop there. Every now and then, Lily would catch Noah's eyes glinting with that same mischievous spark she'd once loved in Max. It made her pause, just for a moment, before she shook herself back into the present. Noah had never met his father, and Lily had made sure to keep that part of their story as simple as possible. She didn't want to burden him with the weight of what had happened between her and Max. And even though Noah was still so young, Lily found herself holding on to the hope that one day he would understand, that he would be okay. She watched him for a few more seconds, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "Look at you, buddy," she said softly, smiling as Noah knocked over his block tower and squealed in delight. "You're growing up so fast." Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, pulling Lily from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen. It was an email, and the subject line made her heart skip a beat. Potential project. Matthews Interiors. Lily froze. Her thumb hovered over the message, but she didn't open it right away. It had been months since she'd last thought about Max, and even though she'd long since given up on him, there were still moments when his name, or anything tied to him, would hit her like a freight train. She hadn't expected it to be this way, not after all the work she'd put into rebuilding her life. And yet here she was, staring at an email that had the potential to drag her back into a past she was trying so hard to leave behind. Taking a deep breath, she finally opened the email. The words in front of her were clear, precise, and to the point. "We've reviewed your portfolio and are impressed with your work. We have an upcoming project that would align perfectly with your style, and we'd love to discuss it further. Please let us know your availability to meet. Matthews Interiors, Max's company." The cold, clinical professionalism of the email did little to mask the surge of emotions that flooded Lily's chest. Anger, confusion, frustration. And yet, beneath it all, a surprising sense of pride. She had built herself up from nothing. She had worked tirelessly to establish herself as an interior designer, and now, not only was she being considered for a project by one of the most prestigious design firms in the city, but it was also an opportunity that might bring her face to face with Max again. The man who had called her a gold digger. The man who had denied their son. The man who hadn't once shown up for his child. Part of her wanted to delete the email and forget it ever happened. It would be easy to shut it down, to ignore it like she'd ignored so many things from her past. But another part of her, a quieter, more reflective part, knew that ignoring it wasn't going to be the answer. This was an opportunity, one she couldn't let slip away just because it was tangled up in her history with Max. She knew what she had to do. Noah was napping by the time Lily finally called the number in the email, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed. The voice on the other end was professional, warm, and surprisingly accommodating. They set up a meeting for the following week, and as soon as she hung up, Lily found herself both relieved and sick to her stomach. But she couldn't turn back now, not when everything she'd worked for was on the line. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Lily spent every spare moment making sure her portfolio was pristine, that her designs were ready to present. She went over her presentation 100 times, tweaking every detail until she was satisfied that it was perfect. She would show up for this meeting as the woman she had become, the woman Max had failed to believe in, the woman who had built a life for herself and Noah, despite the odds. Noah had grown into a happy, healthy toddler. He had just turned 2, and though he didn't yet understand the complexities of his father's absence, he was old enough to show how much he loved his mom. He had a wide smile, the kind that lit up his whole face, and it was infectious. Lily couldn't help but smile every time she saw it. But there were moments, too, when she found herself thinking of Max, of the life they might have had if things had turned out differently. She could see so much of him in Noah, the way his laugh was contagious, the way he cocked his head to the side when he was trying to figure something out. But there were other things, too, things that made her pause. The way Noah would reach for her when he needed comfort, just like Max used to. The way he sometimes mimicked the tone of her voice when he was upset, as though he could sense her moods before she even spoke. These small, subtle things were enough to remind her of the man who should have been here, helping her raise their son. But she couldn't dwell on it. She couldn't let herself. There was too much at stake now. And with every step forward, every project completed, Lily could feel herself growing stronger. She was no longer the heartbroken woman who had been left behind. She was a businesswoman now, a mother who had learned to build a life from the ground up. The meeting with Matthews Interiors came quickly, and Lily walked into their sleek office building, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She was dressed in a sharp black blazer, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She looked every bit the part of the confident, successful designer she had become. The meeting itself was everything she expected. The clients were impressed with her portfolio and eager to hear her ideas. It felt good to be recognized for her talent, for her work. But there was something in the air, a lingering sense of discomfort that she couldn't shake. She kept thinking about Max. His presence hung over the meeting like a cloud. She didn't know if he would be there, but she knew it was only a matter of time before their paths crossed again. Sure enough, as the meeting wrapped up and Lily was standing up to leave, she heard a familiar voice from across the room. "Lily." She froze. There he was, standing in the doorway of the office, looking exactly as she remembered. Max Matthews. The man who had walked away from her without a second thought. The man who had rejected their son, now standing in front of her like no time had passed at all. For a moment, neither of them said a word. Lily could feel the tension rising between them, the unresolved anger, the years of pain. She could see the surprise in Max's eyes, but there was something else too. Regret? Guilt? She couldn't tell. "Max," she finally said, her voice calm despite the storm inside her. "I didn't expect to see you here." Max cleared his throat, his gaze softening. "I didn't expect to see you either," he replied. "But I'm glad you're here. I've heard a lot about your work." Lily's heart raced. She wanted to say something biting, something that would make him feel the weight of the past, but instead, she found herself nodding politely. "Thank you. I've been working hard." Max seemed to hesitate, as if unsure of what to say next. But before he could speak again, Lily turned to the client sitting at the table. "I look forward to working on this project," she said firmly, her voice professional. "Thank you for your time." And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving Max standing there, his words unspoken. As Lily stepped into the elevator, her pulse still racing, she couldn't help but wonder, what now? Would this be another chance for him to prove he could be part of their lives? Or would he leave again, just like he had before? One thing was certain. She wasn't going to let him ruin everything she had built. Not now. Not ever. But the truth was, she couldn't help but wonder, what if? The sleek, modern office lobby gleamed with polished floors and walls of glass, reflecting the bright city skyline outside. Lily Carter stood at the reception desk, adjusting the straps of her leather handbag as the receptionist handed her a visitor's badge. Her heart raced, not from nerves but from the strange, almost disorienting sense of déjà vu. This was the same building she had once visited as Max Matthews' girlfriend, though back then, she hadn't quite understood the weight of that visit. She had come a long way since then. A long way from the woman Max had walked away from. Her business was gaining momentum, and she was beginning to carve a place for herself in the competitive world of interior design. This project, one she had secured after months of networking, could make or break her career. She wasn't going to let the past, or him, distract her from her goals. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to be sidetracked by the ghosts of old wounds. "Lily Carter?" the receptionist asked, a bright smile on her face. "That's me," Lily said, smiling back as she followed the receptionist's gesture toward the elevator. The doors slid open, and Lily stepped inside, feeling the familiar hum of the building's elevator as it ascended to the top floor. She glanced at her reflection in the mirror on the elevator wall, smoothing her skirt and straightening her shoulders. She had spent years building this new version of herself, strong, focused, independent. The elevator dinged as it reached the top floor, and Lily followed the receptionist down the hallway, passing doors that seemed both intimidating and reassuring in their polished simplicity. She took a steadying breath as they arrived at a large conference room, the doors already open. Lily stepped inside, ready to embrace whatever challenge lay ahead. What she wasn't ready for, however, was the figure standing across the room. Max Matthews. Her heart stuttered, then settled into a steady rhythm, each beat more like a reminder than a shock. Max, looking more polished than ever in his well-tailored suit, stood by the window, his back to her. "Mr. Matthews," she said, her voice steady despite the waves of emotion crashing over her. "I'm here for the meeting." Max turned slowly, his sharp features softening in surprise. His jaw tightened imperceptibly before he composed himself, his eyes narrowing as they locked onto hers. Lily couldn't help but notice the way his gaze lingered on her, searching, measuring, calculating. She stood tall, though every part of her wanted to shrink away, to run, to leave the room. She had dreamed of this moment countless times, but never in the context of business. Not like this. Not in the space she had fought so hard to create for herself. Lily. Max said her name like it was foreign on his tongue. It was odd to hear him say it again. After so many years without him in her life. He stepped forward, extending his hand, and Lily hesitated for a moment, her mind reeling. She hadn't expected to feel anything, certainly not this rush of memories. But here he was, standing in front of her like a ghost she had never quite let go of. She shook his hand, a firm, deliberate grip, making sure her professional poise didn't falter. There would be no room for weakness today. Not here. Not now. "It's been a while," Max said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. His eyes, however, remained guarded. "I wasn't expecting you." Lily gave a tight smile in return. "Funny how life works, isn't it? I wasn't expecting this either." She felt his eyes on her, but she refused to let them unsettle her. Instead, she focused on the project at hand. This wasn't about the past, not about what had happened between them or what he had done to her. This was business. She had a purpose, and that purpose was to show him how far she had come. Max cleared his throat, breaking the brief silence. "Right. Well, let's get down to it." Lily nodded and unfolded the materials she had prepared. As they sat down at the conference table, she tried to keep her focus. But it wasn't easy. The weight of his presence in the room, the familiarity of his voice, his scent, the way he always used to shift in his chair when he was nervous, made it impossible for her to forget who he was. She could see the subtle changes in him, too. The sharper lines of his jaw, the deepening of his eyes. He was still the same man who had once made her feel loved, then discarded her like a forgotten toy. But now, there was something different. Maybe it was the way he avoided meeting her gaze directly, or the way he seemed to speak less with confidence and more with caution. Lily pushed all of this aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. The project, the design. It was easier that way. They dove into the project details, discussing layouts, materials, and vision for the space. Max, as always, was decisive and intelligent in his opinions, but Lily couldn't ignore the tension that hung in the air, thick and uncomfortable. There were moments when their hands brushed as they both reached for the same document, or when their eyes locked for just a beat too long. Each small exchange made her skin prickle, reminding her of the unresolved emotions that still simmered beneath the surface. And yet, despite everything, she couldn't help but marvel at how much she had changed. The woman who had walked away from him 5 years ago was no longer fragile or uncertain. She wasn't the woman he had abandoned, the one who had begged for answers and never received them. She was different, stronger. "Your vision for this is impressive," Max said after a long stretch of discussion. "I can see the passion you've put into this." Lily met his gaze, her eyes cold. "You don't get to compliment me," she said, her voice more biting than she intended. Max's brow furrowed. He opened his mouth to respond, but hesitated. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," Lily interrupted, her voice steady, despite the surge of anger rising in her chest. "But you don't get to tell me what I've done right, not after everything, not after you walked away." Max's face stiffened, his jaw tightening. For a moment, Lily thought he might say something to defend himself, to explain the years of silence, but instead, he pressed his lips together and nodded. "You're right," he said softly. "I don't get to do that." Lily didn't want to feel anything for him. She didn't want his apology, didn't want his sympathy, didn't want him to look at her with those soft eyes that had once made her believe in him. But there was something about the way he said it, the quiet sincerity in his voice, that cracked open a small, dangerous part of her that she had kept locked away. The truth was, as much as she had told herself she was over him, she wasn't. She hadn't been. And now, sitting across from him, seeing the guilt in his eyes, the remorse that seemed to weigh down every word, she couldn't escape the truth. Part of her still cared. But she wasn't going to let that stop her. Lily adjusted her chair, clearing her throat. "Let's move forward with the project," she said, her voice colder than before. "This is business, nothing more. We'll get through this, just like we always did." Max nodded, though his eyes remained focused on her, tracing her features as though trying to uncover the person she had become. It was then, as they returned to discussing the project, that Lily realized something. As much as she hated to admit it, this wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about proving something to herself. And maybe, just maybe, about proving something to him too. The days that followed the meeting in Max's office were a blur for Lily. She poured herself into the project with the same relentless focus that had made her business a success. But no matter how hard she tried to block him out, Max lingered in her thoughts. The memory of his presence, the way his eyes searched hers like he was trying to understand the woman she had become, kept gnawing at her. She told herself it was just the awkwardness of their unexpected reunion, nothing more. But deep down, she knew better. Lily had worked too hard to become the person she was now, too hard to let her past dictate her future. Yet every time they met for a project review or exchanged emails, that past would resurface, pushing at the walls she had so carefully built. It wasn't just the past, though. Max had changed, too. The man she had known years ago, arrogant, self-assured, and quick to shut her out, was no longer the person sitting across from her at the conference table. Now he was guarded, quieter, his sharp edges softened by some invisible weight. She couldn't quite figure it out, but it was clear to her. Max Matthews was no longer the man who had dismissed her and the life they could have had. But she wasn't sure if that made him better or worse. The first few weeks of their working relationship felt like walking on a tightrope. Every decision they made was laced with tension, as though they were both constantly aware of the delicate balance they had to maintain. Lily kept her interactions strictly professional, keeping the lines between them clear. The project was moving forward well, but there was an undercurrent of unresolved emotions that neither of them was willing to address. It wasn't just the awkwardness that came with seeing someone who had been so significant in her past, but the constant reminder of the trust that had been broken, of the promises that had been shattered. And then there was Noah. Noah. Lily's mind couldn't help but wander to him. The more she worked with Max, the more she noticed the subtle similarities between him and Noah. Noah's smile, which was a mirror of Max's crooked grin. The way he laughed, just like Max used to, loud and uninhibited. She could see it in his eyes, too. Those same intense, piercing eyes that used to make her heart race when she was with Max. She had never wanted to admit it, but Noah was his son. And every time she saw something in Noah that reminded her of Max, it made her stomach twist. There were moments when she saw those traits in Noah, and for just a brief second, the pain of the past would creep back in, catching her off guard. She would quickly push it aside, though, because her son was the most important thing in her life. And yet, even as she tried to put the pieces of her past behind her, the reality of Noah's paternity loomed over her. She couldn't escape the fact that Noah had a father, a man who, for reasons that Lily would never fully understand, had chosen to walk away. One afternoon, after a long meeting with Max, Lily was driving home, the steady hum of the car engine filling the silence as her thoughts wandered. She had been trying to compartmentalize everything, work, motherhood, the project, but it was becoming harder and harder to keep Max out of her mind. He had been at every meeting since their initial reunion, contributing to the project in a way that made it clear he wasn't just here because of her. He was invested. But was he invested in the project? Or in something else? It wasn't lost on her that Max was paying attention to her in ways that went beyond professional courtesy. There were moments when he would meet her eyes just a little too long, when his tone would soften, and the walls between them would falter. She would push them back up as quickly as they came down, but it was becoming harder to ignore. She didn't know why it bothered her so much. After all, they were just colleagues now. Max had been a distant figure in her life for years, and yet, every time she saw him, every time their gazes crossed, the ghosts of their past seemed to come to life. Noah's voice broke her from her thoughts. "Mom, can we go to the park?" he asked from the back seat, his voice filled with excitement. Lily smiled and glanced in the rearview mirror at her son. "The park sounds like a good idea, buddy," she replied, taking a deep breath as she turned onto the road that would take them to their favorite spot. As she drove, she couldn't help but think of how different her life was now. Noah was growing up healthy and happy, despite everything. She had worked so hard to make sure of that. She had fought through the dark days after Max left, through the loneliness and the fear of raising a child alone, with no one to rely on. But now, Noah was her world, her entire reason for doing everything she did. But there were moments, when Noah was asleep at night, or when she watched him playing with his friends at the park, that she would wonder if he was missing something. And when she saw the way Max's eyes would soften when he looked at him, it only served to remind her that Noah had a father who was, in theory, supposed to be there. And yet, for all his talk of ambition and career, Max had never once tried to be there for his son. Until now. The next few weeks passed in a blur. The project was moving along, but the tension between Lily and Max continued to simmer. She kept it professional, pushing through their interactions with a practiced smile. But it wasn't just the work that made things complicated. It was the small, intimate moments that she hadn't expected. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling meeting, Max lingered in the conference room, watching her as she packed up her materials. She could feel his eyes on her, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to look at him. Really look at him. Max looked different now, his hair slightly graying at the temples, a few more lines around his eyes, but still the same man. The man she had once loved. The man who had once made her feel like everything in her life could fall into place, only to rip it all away when he walked out. "I've been thinking about Noah," Max said, breaking the silence between them. Lily froze. The mention of her son, her precious boy, always made her heart race, but hearing Max speak his name felt different. It was like he was taking a step closer to something he had ignored for so long. "Max, don't," she said, her voice sharp. "I don't need you to think about Noah. You walked away, remember?" Max's face faltered, a flicker of regret crossing his features. "I know," he said quietly, "and I've been a fool for it." She met his gaze, her voice steady despite the emotions crashing inside her. "If you really want to make things right, then prove it. Don't just talk about it. Show up for him. He deserves that." Max didn't respond immediately, his expression clouded with something that looked like regret, or maybe guilt. She didn't know which, and frankly, she didn't care. "I know I've made mistakes," he said at last, his voice softer now. "And I know I can't undo what I did. But I want to try. For him. For you." Lily felt the familiar rush of anger rise in her chest, and she quickly turned away, gathering her things. "I don't need your pity, Max, and I don't need your attempts at redemption. What I need is for you to stay the hell out of my life, and more importantly, Noah's life. I'm raising him alone, and I don't need you showing up now just to make yourself feel better." Max's face twisted in frustration, but he didn't argue. Instead, he nodded, his shoulders sagging slightly as though he had already accepted that he would never fully make up for the damage he had caused. "I'll leave you to it," he said, his tone heavier than before. "But I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for him, whether you like it or not." Lily didn't respond. She didn't know what to say anymore. It had been too long, and too much had happened. She was no longer the naive woman who had once believed that Max could be the person she needed him to be. And yet, in the quiet of that office, as she turned away from him, there was a small part of her that wanted to believe him. That wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, Max could be the father Noah deserved. But she wouldn't let herself go there. Not yet. Not when she had spent so much time building a life without him. Not when the past had already taught her the hard lesson that some people, some men, were best left in the past. It had been weeks since that final conversation in the office, and Lily couldn't help but feel as though things had been put in motion that she couldn't control. Despite the tension between her and Max, the project continued to evolve, albeit with an undercurrent of unresolved tension that neither of them addressed head-on. Max kept his distance when they weren't working, showing up on time and staying professional, but Lily felt the weight of his presence every time they shared a room. His effort to be a part of Noah's life was becoming more pronounced. He was there, at the edge of every interaction, watching, waiting, as though he expected her to let him in. Lily, however, wasn't ready to let anyone in. Every time Noah's name came up in their conversations, when Max asked about his health, his school, or even his favorite toy, Lily felt a pang of resentment. She had raised Noah alone for so long. She had learned to navigate life as a single mother without any help from Max. Now, when it seemed like he was showing interest, it felt like an intrusion, as if he was trying to take credit for something he had abandoned. Still, there were moments, fleeting moments, when she caught him watching Noah from a distance. His expression was unreadable, but the depth of it struck her. Max was trying to find a way back in, but the question was whether that was for Noah or for himself. The day the truth came out, it wasn't through some grand gesture or emotional confrontation. No, it came in the most ordinary of moments, when Lily least expected it. She was in the middle of a project at a local cafe reviewing design plans for a new client when she received the email. It was from Max's company, regarding a new office design project. Lily's heart skipped a beat as she read through the brief. It wasn't just any project. It was one of the largest assignments she had ever been offered, with a budget that could solidify her career for good. There was just one problem. Max was the one who had hired her. The email was polite, professional, but there was no mistaking the urgency in Max's message. He wanted to meet her that afternoon to discuss the scope of the project. Lily's stomach tightened as she stared at the screen. The last time she had seen him, their parting had been far from amicable. Her immediate instinct was to refuse, to send an email back with an apology and a suggestion to pass her work to someone else. She didn't want to deal with him. Not now. Not when the wounds of the past were still so raw. But there was no denying the opportunity before her. This was the break she had been waiting for, an opportunity that could change everything. If she turned it down, she risked losing something that could propel her career forward. With a deep breath, she typed out a short response. "I'll meet you this afternoon at 3 p.m. The moment she hit send, she regretted it. What had she just done? At 2:45 p.m., Lily was waiting outside the trendy cafe that had become her go-to meeting spot. Her thoughts were scattered, and she wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting. Was Max offering this project because he felt guilty, or because he saw potential in her work? It was impossible to tell. As she stood there, adjusting her jacket in the cool autumn air, she saw him. Max was walking toward her, wearing his signature suit, perfectly pressed and polished. He looked the same, but there was something different about him. His posture was less confident, almost unsure, as though the man she had known before had been replaced by a quieter, more vulnerable version. "Lily," he said, his voice carrying a strange tenderness that caught her off guard. "Thank you for meeting with me." She nodded stiffly, trying to keep the emotional distance between them. "It's no problem. You're the one who asked for the meeting." Max offered a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I know. I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. I know things between us have been complicated. Lily forced herself to meet his gaze. She didn't want to show any weakness, didn't want to let him see how much his presence affected her. But the truth was, it did. And she hated it. "Let's talk about the project," she said, her voice firm, cutting through the awkwardness between them. Max nodded, and they stepped inside the cafe, settling into a booth in the back. She tried to focus on the design plans, flipping through the pages with practiced ease, but the tension between them was undeniable. She could feel his eyes on her, the weight of his stare too heavy to ignore. "I know this must be uncomfortable for you," Max said quietly after a long silence. "But I need you to know that I'm not here just because of the past. I think you're incredibly talented, Lily. And I want you to have this project." Lily looked up at him, her expression guarded. "You're offering me this job because you think I'm talented? Or because you want to make up for abandoning me?" Max flinched at the words, but he didn't look away. "I'm offering it to you because you've earned it. And because I want to help. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to make things right. At least in some small way." Lily felt a knot tighten in her chest, but she pushed it away. She didn't want to go down this road. Not again. Not now. "Let's stick to the project, Max," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "We can talk about personal stuff another time, if at all." Max nodded, but Lily could see the disappointment in his eyes. He wasn't giving up easily, and that unsettled her more than she cared to admit. The meeting dragged on for another hour, with Lily doing most of the talking. It wasn't until the end, as they were wrapping up, that Max spoke again, his voice tentative. "There's something else I need to ask," he said. "About Noah." Lily froze, her hand halting in midair as she reached for her bag. She had known this moment would come, but she hadn't expected it to be today, at this meeting. "Noah?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Max shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "I've been thinking a lot about him, about how much he looks like me." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "I need to know, Lily. Is he mine?" The question hung in the air, thick and heavy. Lily's heart hammered in her chest, her throat going dry. She had known this was coming. She just hadn't expected it to come now, when things were just starting to settle. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before answering. "Yes, Max. Noah is your son." Max's face paled, and for a moment, it felt like the world around them stopped. The noise of the cafe faded away, and all Lily could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Then, Max's voice broke the silence. I never thought he could be mine. I thought you were lying." He closed his eyes, as though the words were physically painful for him to say. Lily couldn't hide the bitterness that crept into her voice. "You didn't give me a chance to tell you the truth, Max. You didn't even ask." "I know," he said, his voice strained. "And for that, I'll never forgive myself. I didn't think it was real. I didn't think you were real." Lily felt a flicker of something she couldn't name. Anger, sadness, a touch of regret. But mostly, she felt the weight of it all, the years of silence, the broken promises, the life they had built apart. She looked at him, the man who had once been her world, and the man who had abandoned her when she needed him most. "It doesn't matter now, Max. Noah's here, and I've been raising him alone. He doesn't need you to come in and out of his life when it's convenient for you. If you want to be a part of it, you have to prove it." Max's eyes were filled with regret, but there was something else there too. Determination. A desire to make things right, however impossible it seemed. "I'll prove it," he said. his voice low but steady. "Not because I expect forgiveness, but because I want to be a father, to Noah, to both of you." Lily didn't respond right away. She didn't know how to. All she knew was that the man sitting across from her, despite everything, was trying to change. But was it enough? Would it ever be enough? "Prove it then," she said quietly, standing up from the table, "and I'll consider it." As she walked out of the cafe, Lily felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The conversation with Max had opened old wounds, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face what that meant for her future. But there was one thing she knew for sure. Noah needed stability. And as much as Max's sudden interest in his life stirred up anger and pain, she wouldn't let it affect her son. She would protect Noah no matter what. And if Max truly wanted to be a part of his life, he would have to prove it. He would have to show up. For Noah. For them. And she wasn't sure if that was something he was truly capable of. Max's attempts to make amends were gradual at first. They weren't grand gestures or sweeping apologies, but small, consistent efforts. He showed up to Noah's soccer games, though the boy barely acknowledged him. He sent gifts, carefully chosen, things he thought Noah might like. A set of building blocks for when Noah was a little older, a few picture books that Max had selected after watching Noah's fascination with the ones Lily often read to him. But it was always the same. Noah would look at the gifts, then glance back up at Max with a quiet gaze, curious perhaps, but distant. Lily, too, was watching Max's every move, not as a partner or lover, but as a man who had deserted her and her son. She wasn't sure what to make of his efforts, whether he was sincere or whether it was guilt manifesting as action, and that uncertainty made her hesitate. Max knew it was a long road. He had never imagined it would be easy to win back trust. How could it be? He had failed her and Noah at the most critical time, and no amount of apologies would change the past. But he was trying. Max spent the weeks following their conversation in the cafe trying to figure out what it meant to be a father. He hadn't known what that meant for so long. He had run away from responsibility, buried himself in work, in his own comfort, refusing to deal with the consequences of his actions. And now, here he was, standing at the edge of a future he wasn't sure he deserved, but couldn't stop trying to build. But what else could he do, other than show up? Lily, on the other hand, was grappling with the complexity of it all. She had spent the better part of the past few years learning how to navigate motherhood on her own, building a life that didn't include Max. She had no illusions about his transformation. He had hurt her, abandoned her in one of the most vulnerable moments of her life. His absence wasn't just painful, it was a betrayal. And yet, Noah had always been curious about him, even if he didn't fully understand who Max was. He asked about his father at strange moments, almost as though he knew there was a gap in his world that no one could fill. Lily tried to be honest, but the truth was hard. "Daddy's not here right now. Daddy doesn't live with us, but we're okay." That was as far as she went, and Noah seemed to accept it without question. What would it mean, though, for Max to suddenly enter Noah's world? Was it enough for him to show up? Just that simple act of being present? Or was there more to it? Would Max ever be the kind of father who could offer something stable, someone Noah could rely on, not just a shadow who occasionally appeared and then disappeared again? Her doubts were valid. But at the same time, something in her wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, Max was changing. Max was determined to make things right, even if it meant starting with the smallest of steps. He showed up at Noah's school one afternoon, unannounced. The sight of him standing there at the school gates, looking slightly out of place in his suit, as though he was more accustomed to boardrooms than playgrounds, made Lily's heart race with irritation. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight with the frustration she tried so hard to control. "I just wanted to see Noah," Max said quietly. His hands were stuffed into his pockets, and he looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting nervously to the group of children running around the yard. Lily crossed her arms. He's busy, Max, and he's not expecting you. I know, but I thought maybe I could watch him play, just for a little while. Lily stood there for a moment, her chest tightening. She didn't want to let him in, didn't want to expose Noah to this confusion. She had worked so hard to protect him, to keep things simple. And yet, here Max was, in the middle of her carefully constructed world, trying to carve a space for himself. Was she being too harsh? Was she being too protective? Fine, she said finally, her voice colder than she intended. But you stay on the sidelines, and don't push him. Max nodded. I'll respect that. As he watched Noah chase after a soccer ball with the other kids, Lily stood off to the side, her arms still crossed. She couldn't quite bring herself to stand next to him. There was too much history between them, too much unresolved. Watching him, she saw the way he clenched his jaw, trying to remain composed. The guilt was written all over his face. But guilt wasn't enough. He could apologize all he wanted, but his actions, his presence, his consistency were the only things that would prove his sincerity. The weeks passed, and Max continued his slow, almost imperceptible attempts to integrate himself into Noah's life. He attended more of his soccer games. He was there for the school play. Max didn't try to overcompensate. He didn't buy Noah gifts or try to overwhelm him with attention. Instead, he focused on just being there, making sure his son saw him, recognized him, but never forcing his way in. Lily watched it all from the periphery, and still, her guard was up. One evening, she was putting Noah to bed when he suddenly spoke up, his voice small and uncertain. Mom, where's Dad? Lily paused mid-motion, her heart skipping a beat. She had never imagined this question would come up so soon. You mean Max? She asked carefully. Noah nodded, his eyes wide. Yeah, he comes to my games, right? But he doesn't stay. Lily swallowed, her throat dry. How could she answer him? How could she explain all the pain she had buried, all the hurt that still lingered in her heart? Sometimes, some people aren't ready to be around, she said softly. Max is still figuring out what it means to be a good dad. Noah looked at her with wide eyes, his little face full of innocence. But he's my dad, right? Lily couldn't help the lump that formed in her throat. He was asking the questions she had hoped would never come. How could she explain the complicated nature of forgiveness, of healing, when she wasn't sure herself? Yes, she whispered. He is. The next day, Max appeared at Noah's soccer game again. But this time, something was different. Max stood at the edge of the field, watching intently. But this time, Noah noticed him. Instead of ignoring him or running in the opposite direction like he had before, Noah walked up to Max, his small feet crunching the grass underfoot. His face was guarded, but there was something else there. A curiosity, a hesitance. Dad, Noah said quietly, as he came to a stop in front of Max. His voice was soft, as if he wasn't sure he had the right to say the word. Max's eyes softened, and for the first time, he wasn't the man who had abandoned his responsibilities. He wasn't the man who had caused so much pain. He was just a father, standing in front of his son, unsure of where to begin. Hey, buddy, Max said, his voice cracking slightly as he crouched down to Noah's level. You did great out there. Noah looked at him, his expression unreadable. Then, after a moment, he nodded. Thanks. Max's chest tightened. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later that evening, when the game was over and Noah had gone to bed, Max and Lily sat down together for the first time in a long while. There were no more barriers between them, no more walls to hide behind. They had both been forced to confront the past in ways they weren't prepared for, and yet, here they were, trying to find a way forward. I'm sorry, Max said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what else to say, but I'm sorry. For everything. For not being there for you. For Noah. Lily shook her head, not out of anger, but in something deeper. Sadness, maybe, or just a sense of finality. Sorry isn't enough, Max. It never will be. But you're starting to show up. And that matters. For Noah's sake. Max nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had a long way to go. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was fighting a battle he couldn't win. He felt like he was finally doing what he should have done all along. Are you ready to let me be a part of his life? Max asked. His voice filled with uncertainty but hope. Lily looked at him, her heart torn. She had spent so long protecting Noah from the uncertainty of the past, from the man who had failed them both. But now, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep him away. I'm not sure, she said honestly, but you're going to have to prove it, and it's going to take time. Max looked at her, his expression open and vulnerable. I'm ready to prove it, Lily. I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere. For the first time, Lily believed him. But that didn't mean it would be easy, and it didn't mean she was ready to forgive him. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, they could start building something, slowly, piece by piece. And for Noah, it would be enough. Max left that evening, but something had shifted. It wasn't the resolution of the past, nor was it some grand redemption, but it was a beginning. A small, tentative step towards a future that no one had been sure they could reach. Lily watched him leave, a part of her still cautious, still uncertain. But another part of her, buried deep, felt something else. Something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. Max's efforts had been consistent, and Lily had started to see the subtle, if not always obvious, changes in him. But as much as she tried to keep her guard up, there was always a part of her that couldn't ignore the nagging feeling. What if this was all for show? What if Max was still the same man who had walked away without a second thought? She wasn't sure she could ever fully trust him again, no matter how hard he tried. Then, just as Lily was starting to feel a fragile balance between their lives, one foot in the past, the other inching toward a new future, an email arrived that would challenge everything. It was early in the morning when she saw it in her inbox. The subject line was simple: Important opportunity for Noah. At first, she thought it was just another promotion or sales pitch, but then her eyes widened when she saw the sender. Max's company. Lily opened it, her pulse rising. The email was from one of Max's colleagues, a senior executive, outlining an opportunity for Noah to attend a prestigious school on a full scholarship. The email was carefully worded, but the intent was clear. Max had arranged this for Noah without asking her. Lily felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she read through the details. The school was one of the most exclusive in the city, a place that boasted an impressive track record of producing future leaders. The scholarship covered tuition, books, extracurricular activities, everything. It was the kind of opportunity most parents only dreamed of for their children. But the more Lily read, the more the weight of the situation pressed down on her. The school was exactly what Max had always wanted for his child. It was prestigious, expensive, and, in his eyes, an unquestionable path to a better life. But Lily wasn't sure this was the right choice for Noah. And that wasn't even the biggest problem. Max hadn't discussed it with her first. He had decided, in his typical way, that he knew what was best for their son. Lily's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Should she respond immediately? Should she just tell them it wasn't something she was willing to entertain? Or worse yet, did this feel like a manipulation? A way for Max to buy his way back into Noah's life? She couldn't shake the feeling that this scholarship wasn't about Noah at all. It was about Max's guilt. She hit reply before she could overthink it too much. Dear, executive's name, thank you for the email. I was surprised to learn about the scholarship opportunity for Noah. While I appreciate the generosity, I must make it clear that this is a decision for me and Noah to make together, not something I can accept without further discussion. I will be in touch to arrange a conversation regarding this matter. Best, Lily Carter. She took a deep breath as she hit send. She had done the right thing. She had set a boundary. A clear message that Max couldn't just step into their lives and fix things with money, no matter how well-intentioned he might be. Later that day, when Noah was napping, Lily sat down to wait for Max's response. He had been attending more games, trying to insert himself into Noah's world slowly. But she knew that the last thing Noah needed was to have his life controlled by the man who had abandoned him for so long. The phone rang. It was Max. Lily picked it up after the second ring. "Max." "I got your email," he said, his voice flat but tight. "I didn't expect you to respond that way." Lily's eyes narrowed. "How else was I supposed to respond? You made a decision for Noah without even consulting me. I don't want you thinking you can buy your way back into his life, Max. That's not how this works." There was silence on the other end of the line. She could hear the distant hum of a phone, maybe his office phone, and the sound of him shifting in his seat. "Lily, that's not what I was trying to do," he said finally. I wanted to give him a chance. He deserves the best." Lily felt her chest tighten. "Noah deserves more than just money, Max. He deserves consistency, someone who shows up every single day, not just when it's convenient or when you feel guilty." There was a long pause. She could feel his resistance building. "I wasn't trying to replace you. I'm not doing this to make you angry." "Then why didn't you tell me?" Lily's voice softened, but the hurt was still there. "Why didn't you talk to me first, before making a decision that affects both of us?" Max's voice faltered. "I wasn't sure how you'd react. I was trying to do something good for him." "And you thought you could just give him the best education and everything would be fine?" she countered, her voice rising again. "That's not how it works, Max. You can't just buy your way back into his life." Max let out a heavy sigh. "I know I've made mistakes. I can't undo what happened, but I thought this scholarship might make things right." Lily shook her head, even though he couldn't see it. "It's not about money, Max. It's about being there, showing up for him in ways that matter, and you can't just fix things by throwing money at him." Max went quiet. The silence stretched on for a few moments before he spoke again, his voice low. "I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now that I wasn't. I'll let it go." Lily wasn't sure if she was relieved or angry. The scholarship, though an incredible opportunity, wasn't what Noah needed. He needed Max to prove he could be a father, not a benefactor. She wanted him to fight for their son, to earn his place, not just throw money around and hope that fixed everything. "Thank you," she said, her voice still calm but resolute. "But we'll make our own decisions, Max. I'll let you know what Noah wants when the time comes. If he wants to go to that school, we'll figure it out." Max's voice was barely a whisper. "I understand, Lily. I'm sorry. I'll prove to you that I'm serious about being in his life." She could hear the regret in his voice, but Lily wasn't ready to take that step. She wasn't ready to just forgive him for what he'd done. Not yet. But there was a part of her that believed him. He wasn't trying to manipulate her anymore. He was trying, albeit awkwardly, to be present. But would that be enough? Would he prove himself worthy of a place in Noah's life? Lily didn't know yet. But she wasn't going to let Max make decisions for them anymore. Not without her input. Not unless he could show, in small ways, that he was serious about making things right. The rest of the evening passed in a quiet blur as Lily sat at the kitchen table, her phone still in her hand. The email was sent, the conversation had been had, and Max had promised to step back. She just hoped he was ready to keep that promise. The hospital smelled sterile, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the walls as Lily paced back and forth in the waiting room. She'd been sitting there for hours, trying to keep it together, trying to hold it all together for Noah, who had been admitted after his sudden collapse at school. At first, the doctors thought it was just a virus, but after some tests, they'd found something more troubling, an underlying condition that required further investigation. Lily's mind raced. She had been so busy with work, so consumed by the day-to-day of building a new life, that she had barely noticed Noah growing quieter, more fatigued. There had been small signs, yes, more naps, slower movements after school, but she had chalked it up to him adjusting to the changes. She hadn't expected this. She never expected her son's health to become a question of life or death. The waiting room was unusually silent. The sterile, uncomfortable chairs felt like they were pressing down on her, suffocating her with their formality. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for answers that she was terrified to hear. Noah, her son, her everything. It didn't seem possible that something could be so wrong. The door swung open with a soft creak, and Max walked into the room, looking disheveled and pale. He hadn't said a word when she called him earlier that afternoon, just hung up quickly, his voice tight. But she knew he would come. He had to come. Lily didn't even have time to brace herself before he was standing in front of her, his eyes wide, his face drawn with worry. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he just pulled her into a tight, unexpected hug. Lily's first instinct was to pull away, but then she realized how much she needed that contact, how much she needed to feel grounded, even if it was from the man who had hurt her. "Is he okay?" Max's voice was low and frantic, his hands trembling slightly as he held her. "I don't know yet," Lily replied, her throat tight with the fear she hadn't been able to vocalize until now. "They're running more tests. The doctors aren't sure what it is yet." Max nodded, still holding her, as if he didn't know what else to do but be there. Lily was caught off guard by his presence. She had expected him to be distant, guarded, the same man who had walked away when things had gotten hard before. But this was different. This wasn't about pride or guilt. It was about Noah. Max stepped back, his hand lingering on her arm for a moment before he let it drop. His eyes searched hers for an answer to the unspoken question hanging between them. "Is this okay?" Lily didn't say anything, but she nodded. And in that moment, everything shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, Max was actually there. Minutes later, a doctor came into the room, her face grim. She introduced herself briefly, and Lily's heart began to beat faster, a cold, nauseating feeling building in her stomach. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Matthews," the doctor said, addressing them both. "I have the results of Noah's tests." Max stepped forward, his body tense, and Lily instinctively grabbed his arm. Her pulse raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. "This is just a test. It's just information. Don't panic." The doctor took a deep breath. "We've found something concerning. Noah has a genetic blood disorder. It's rare, but it's treatable with careful monitoring. We're still doing further tests to determine the severity, but we want to get ahead of this as quickly as possible. We need to start treatment right away." Lily's heart skipped a beat. The word treatable was a small comfort, but the word rare made her stomach churn. She'd read enough about medical conditions in the past to know that rare often meant something more complicated, something unpredictable. Max, to his credit, didn't break down. He didn't crumble or shut down, even though Lily could see the shock in his eyes. She saw the flicker of emotion, the slight tremor in his hand as he clenched it into a fist by his side. Lily nodded, trying to absorb the information. Treatable. That was the key. She repeated the word silently to herself, over and over again, as if it could somehow protect her from the worst-case scenario. "We'll need to run more tests to determine the exact course of treatment," the doctor continued. "But we'll get him started on a regimen immediately. If everything goes according to plan, there's a strong chance he'll make a full recovery." A full recovery. Lily's mind grasped onto that, her only anchor in the storm of her thoughts. Max reached out and squeezed her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "We're going to get through this," he said quietly. "We'll do whatever it takes to make sure Noah gets the care he needs." Lily didn't respond right away. She just nodded, her thoughts swirling. The truth was, she didn't know how she felt. She was so relieved that Noah's condition was treatable, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. This was no longer just about Noah's health. It was about Max, and her, and their shared responsibility for this child, the child they had created together. Max looked at her, his eyes filled with an intensity she couldn't quite place. They were a family, not a conventional one, not the one they had originally planned, but it was real. And now, Noah was the center of it. "We'll take it one day at a time," Lily said, her voice firm and steady, despite the whirlwind inside her. "First, we focus on Noah, and then we figure everything else out." Max nodded, his expression solemn. He didn't argue with her. There was no time for that. The only thing that mattered now was Noah. They both knew that. Later that evening, after Noah had been settled into a treatment plan and was resting comfortably, Lily found herself standing in the hospital hallway, her back against the cool wall. Max was still with Noah, talking to the doctors about the next steps, but Lily needed a moment to herself. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, trying to calm her racing heart. She hadn't expected this, any of this. She hadn't expected Max to be there, standing by her side, supporting her. He had been so distant, so removed from their lives for so long. But now, here he was, asking questions, staying late, making sure Noah was cared for. She couldn't deny that a part of her was surprised. She had spent so much time assuming that Max would never change, that he would never be the man he needed to be for their son. But the man standing in that hospital room, asking the right questions, taking responsibility, was not the same man who had walked away years ago. And yet, despite the relief that Noah's condition was treatable, a part of Lily felt conflicted. She had spent so long building her life without Max. She had built a career, a stable future for Noah. She had learned to depend on herself. But now, here Max was again, showing up. And Lily wasn't sure what to do with him, what to do with herself, with the feelings that were beginning to stir. She wasn't ready to let him back in. Not fully. But she couldn't pretend that his presence didn't matter, that his support didn't count for something. In the midst of the chaos, one thing was clear. Max was here for Noah. He was showing up for their son. And that was all that mattered, for now. When Lily returned to Noah's room, Max was sitting by his bedside, his face still drawn with worry. But when he saw her, he smiled softly, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were a team again. Not a perfect one, not one without complications, but a team nonetheless. Lily walked over to Noah's bed, pulling up a chair beside him. She reached for his hand, brushing his hair back from his forehead. He looked peaceful in his sleep, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth as if he knew everything was going to be okay. Max sat beside her, his elbow resting on the armrest. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice quiet but determined. Lily looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long while. He was here. He was trying. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. "We will," she agreed softly, squeezing Noah's hand. "We will." But as she sat there, with Max by her side, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something bigger, something that neither of them was prepared for, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. Not yet. Not completely. But for Noah, she would. The sun was starting to set as Lily stood by the side of the soccer field, her eyes fixed on Noah as he ran across the grass, his small legs pumping with unbridled energy. His laughter rang in the air, pure and joyful, as he kicked the ball past his opponent and into the goal, the crowd cheering. She couldn't help but smile. It had been months since that night in the hospital when everything had changed, when Noah's health scare had shaken them all to their core. Since then, life had taken on a new rhythm, a new sense of balance. Noah was healthy now, the treatments had worked, and he was back to being the lively, energetic child he had always been. But it wasn't just Noah who had changed. Lily looked to her left, where Max stood, his hands in his pockets, watching Noah play with a pride in his eyes that was hard to ignore. He had been there, really there, for Noah in ways she hadn't expected. For the first time in years, Max wasn't just a distant figure. He was present. He was doing the work. And that was something she hadn't been prepared for. Lily had spent so many years focusing on herself, on Noah, and on building a life without Max, that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone beside her, to share the burden, to share the joy. Max had been slowly earning her trust back, one small act at a time. He'd started attending every game, every school event. He wasn't perfect, and they didn't pretend things had gone back to how they were, but he was there. And that, she realized, was enough for now. For Noah. She turned her gaze back to Noah, her heart swelling as he ran toward her, his smile wide, his arms outstretched as if he couldn't wait to share his excitement. He had scored a goal. "Mom, did you see that?" Noah asked breathlessly, his face flushed with excitement. Lily knelt down, wrapping her arms around him. "I saw it, buddy. That was amazing. You're getting so good at this." Noah beamed, his excitement palpable. "I'm the best on the team, right?" Lily laughed softly, giving him a tight squeeze. "You're definitely one of the best." "Did you see Dad too?" he asked, looking over his shoulder to where Max stood. "He cheered for me." Lily looked up at Max. Their eyes met, and for a moment, everything felt strangely simple. Max was still standing there, still watching, still a part of their lives in a way that she hadn't anticipated. The walls she had spent so long building up between them had started to crumble, piece by piece, without either of them fully realizing it. She'd been so determined to protect herself, to protect Noah, but now she was beginning to see that healing didn't mean shutting people out. It meant letting them in whatever way was possible. Max moved toward them, his hands still in his pockets, but there was something different in the way he approached. There was a softness to him now, a quiet confidence. He wasn't the man he had been before, not the one who had walked away, who had been too proud to fight for what really mattered. "Great job out there, champ," Max said to Noah, kneeling down and ruffling his hair. "Thanks, Dad," Noah replied, grinning up at him. Lily watched the interaction, her chest tightening for a moment before she reminded herself that this was what it was all about, building a new foundation, a better one. Max straightened up, his eyes still on Noah. "You're really good at this," he said, his voice tinged with genuine admiration. Lily gave him a small nod. She didn't need the grand gestures anymore. This, right here, was enough. The quiet support, the willingness to show up. She'd seen enough to know that Max was ready to be a consistent presence in Noah's life. That was what mattered. And that was all she was asking for. Noah turned to her again. "When's the next game, Mom?" Lily smiled, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "It's next weekend. You'll have another chance to score some more goals." "I'm going to score 5 next time," Noah declared, as if that were the only possible option. Lily laughed. "I'm sure you will, but don't get too cocky. There are some tough players out there." Max stepped forward, glancing down at her. "You're doing a great job with him," he said quietly, his voice almost hesitant. Lily met his gaze, unsure of how to respond at first. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to let go of the hurt, the anger, that had followed him leaving. But something had changed between them in the last few months. Maybe it was seeing him show up for Noah. Maybe it was the small ways he'd proven that he wanted to be here. Maybe it was just the time that had passed, the space for healing, the realization that they were both different people now. "Thank you," she said softly, offering him a genuine smile. "You're trying. That's all I ever needed from you. Just to show up." Max's expression softened, and he nodded. "I'm trying. I know I can't fix everything, but I'm here." Lily didn't respond right away. Instead, she took a moment to look at the field, at Noah playing, at Max beside her, and then she let out a deep breath. It was strange. She had spent so long trying to carry everything on her own, convinced that it was the only way. But now, she was beginning to realize that she didn't have to carry it all by herself anymore. They didn't have to have all the answers. They didn't have to know what the future would look like. But they were here, together, and maybe that was enough. She glanced at Max again, her heart beating a little faster than usual, but there was no fear this time. Just a quiet understanding, an acknowledgement that they were both navigating uncharted waters, but they were doing it together. They were learning to trust again. Noah ran back over to them, his cheeks still flushed from the game, his energy infectious. "When's the next practice?" he asked. "Tomorrow afternoon," Lily replied, standing up and brushing off her pants. "Same time." Noah jumped up and down excitedly. "I'm going to get better and better." Lily laughed, ruffling his hair as he continued to bounce around. She looked over at Max, who was watching Noah with that same look of quiet pride. This was new. This was different. And for the first time in a long time, Lily felt a flicker of hope for the future. Not just for herself, but for them. For their family. That night, after the game, Lily found herself sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, her thoughts swirling. Max had stayed for dinner, a simple meal of pasta and salad, and it had been nice. Not perfect, not a fairy tale, but nice, comfortable. And Noah had seemed to enjoy it, which was more important than anything else. Lily wasn't foolish enough to think that everything was suddenly going to be easy. There were still wounds to heal, still barriers between them that couldn't just be erased. But for the first time, she wasn't holding herself so tightly to the past. She wasn't afraid of what might happen. She was open to what could be. She picked up her phone and looked at the calendar. A work meeting for a new project. Noah's school event. Max's visits with Noah. Her own plans for her business. Everything was falling into place. Slowly, steadily. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. Something that wasn't defined by the past, but by what they were building now. She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The future was uncertain, yes, but there was a sense of peace in that. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. And maybe that was enough.